Tarot cards. Welcome back. Today's video we're going to be talking about how you can use tarot cards to pursue personal development, pursue your spiritual awakening process, to really just cause you to introspect more deeply on who you are as an individual. Now, when I first jumped into tarot cards, there's a lot of beliefs that I had built up about them that were really completely unfair and wrong. And primarily, I'm going to list a couple off. Tarot cards are taboo and magic, and they're not really real. Or tarot cards are useless because they don't really do much for you. They're just kind of like a fun thing to play around with. Similar to how people view crystals and a lot of those more exotic sides of spirituality. So, this video is going to kind of cut right through all of that, and I'm going to share with you why a lot of that is wrong and how we can actually use tarot cards in a very beneficial way. So in this video, we're going to be talking about, just very briefly, how to pick out a deck, and then we're going to be talking about some major pitfalls that I've run into when using my tarot deck. And then lastly, we're going to walk you through how I actually do a tarot reading. I tend to try to do daily tarot readings, and sometimes I'll dig in a little bit more if there's a specific issue I want to learn more about. But just walking you through my process, I think, will really help some of you who are new to tarot and who feel a little lost, because there is so much content on the internet that tells you that there's all these super strict ways of doing tarot. And like, if there's one thing you're going to take away from this video, it's that you can do whatever the hell you want. Like, use the tarot cards in whatever fashion you want. Maybe there's certain better ways of using them, and that will be definitely talked about in the pitfalls section of this video, because there are some major pitfalls that I myself have fallen into, and I see a lot of questions all over the place regarding these pitfalls and how to best navigate them. So without further ado, let's jump into today's video on tarot cards. Alright, some of you might not be new to tarot and you've already been playing around with them for a little bit. I want you to know that this video is still applicable to you, but if you just stay tuned for like the next minute, we'll get to the content that I think is really, what you're seeking. So just to quickly go over tarot cards and how you acquire them and dispelling some common myths. Now, I heard a lot of times that you need to be gifted your first tarot deck. Wrong, you don't. You can kind of just go buy yours online. You don't really need to be gifted them at all. There's no significance to that. So yeah, if you're gifted them, fantastic. If you're not, don't let that stop you from jumping into this awesome introspective process. The second question I see a lot is, what tarot deck should I get? And this is a good question, but we need to talk about this for a second. All tarot decks are basically hinged on the same underlying structure. There are 4 suits of cards that go from basically 1 all the way up to 10, and then you have like a couple of suit cards, just like a normal deck of cards. And you have 4 of those suits, and then on top of that you have another section of them typically referred to as the major arcane. And those are more archetype based, more like people and figure based, whereas the other ones are typically denoted as the minor arcane. Now, when it comes to choosing your tarot card deck, I think one of the more important aspects is pick something that you like visually to look at. Most of the places you'll find them online will share some like pictures and some art styles, so find something that like resonates with you, because you're going to be sticking with this deck probably for a good amount of time until you kind of really get the hang of this. So pick something that you really enjoy. I think that's the more important question to ask is, do I like the look of this? Because the function of the deck is going to work pretty similarly all across. Now, I've linked down below a couple of different tarot decks that I would suggest for beginners, because don't get me wrong, they are not all the same, and some of them require a little bit more understanding and skill with a tarot deck. So don't just purely make a decision based off of art. I would almost, if I were in the shoes of looking for a new tarot deck, I would just review things online and just check out what other people are saying. And definitely check out the couple I've linked down below, because those seem to be pretty reputable and pretty commonly used nowadays. Alright, now that we've kind of covered getting started with tarot, I want to talk about some major pitfalls that I fall into continually. I'm not speaking from a spot of having it all figured out. And if there's anything I want you to take away from this video is that it's okay to fall into these pitfalls, but just be aware that you are sometimes. The first pitfall that I fall into a lot is I place really high expectations on the cards. I expect them to give me the answers I want to hear, and I expect them to give me a very clear and concise answer that is actionable. And to me, it defeats the purpose of tarot. The purpose of tarot is to cause you to explore your internal world. And you're not supposed to necessarily get a clear-cut answer. Now, there are times where a reading will give you a pretty in-your-face answer, but that should not be your motivation behind using tarot. Because tarot isn't going to give you yes or no answers. Tarot is going to give you like a tool to introspect further onto the issues that you bring to the table, or the questions that you bring to the table when you're doing a tarot reading. The second pitfall I fall into frequently is having an immediate negative reaction to a card I have picked. There are some cards in your tarot deck that you don't want to pick. There are going to be cards that just give you a negative reaction. They're not positive cards. They're really hitting at some deep things that you don't necessarily always want to see and receive in your tarot reading. In fact, earlier today, I fell into that trap, and it kind of was something I had to work through a lot of the day, was just kind of like sifting through and working through, like, why did the card I pulled this morning impact me so negatively? And what I kind of have recognized, because this happened multiple times to me, is that oftentimes I immediately will see the card make an assumption, and it will give me a negative feeling, and it'll make me fear something. And I get really trapped in that fear, and I start overanalyzing, and I get really overwhelmed by, like, what does this card mean, and why did I get this card? And yeah, I can't tell you really how to get around that, except that just notice that that happens to you, and try to understand why you're being triggered. Why are those feelings coming up inside of you? And as a side note, in the past video, I talked a lot about dealing with feelings. And I provided a really easy, straightforward technique on how you can kind of work through some of these feelings that tarot is going to inevitably invoke within you. I highly suggest watching that video. There'll probably be a little link like right up here. But getting back to tarot, those negative feelings often will mean something, and it kind of is an indicator that you still have personal work to do. So don't just get stuck in the negative feelings of it. Try to shift your perspective and see how you can work with it and not against yourself. The last pitfall is concentrating way too much on the future. Some of the questions and intentions I bring to my tarot deck are often way too focused on like future outcomes, and going back to the first point of expectations of these future outcomes. And I would like to direct your attention to, when you're using tarot cards, try to focus on the present. Try to focus on what's going on now in your life instead of worrying too much about the future. That's not to say that you can't use them effectively for, future considerations. For example, let's say you're thinking about moving into a new career, but you're not really sure how to navigate that process. Well, maybe a good question to ask yourself is, what deep-seated fearful thoughts am I holding on to that are preventing me from picking up and changing into a new career or job? And yes, it's future-oriented, but really it's actionable in the now. And that's kind of what I'm trying to make the point of, is try to make sure that your questions and your intentions are rooted in what is possible to do now and not dwelling too much in the future. You could also use them by looking at your past and digging up some deep-seated traumas and feelings that you haven't worked through or processed yet. And tarot can sometimes shove those in your face, whether you want to or not. In fact, my recent usage of tarot has been emotionally kind of difficult for me, and it's been an awesome learning process, and I've definitely gained value from it. But you're not always going to pick the cards that you want to see, and learning what to do when you get those cards is a really huge point of the whole process of using tarot cards. Alright, so let's dive into what most of you came here probably for, which is to learn how to read tarot cards properly. Now, I'm not saying that my method is the surefire way of doing this, and we'll have probably future videos talking about more details of tarot reading. But I'm going to walk you through what I would do for a daily reading, just to give you an idea of what kind of flow I'm going through when approaching my tarot cards. Now, something I want to point out real quick is that a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on setting your intention. I do believe that is very important, but I don't think necessarily that you can't use tarot cards successfully if you don't necessarily have an intention. For example, some days I don't have any burning questions that I'm trying to ask my deck. And instead of forcing myself to ask a question, I will just randomly draw a card and run with whatever that path takes me on. So now that that's been said and that point's behind us, I'm going to walk you through an actual reading that hopefully you guys find enjoyable. Alright, so to start off, this is the deck I have. It's called the Wild Unknown Tarot. Huge fan of the art style of this deck. Shameless plug. So what I typically start by is, if I do have a question like we're going to talk about in today's reading, I will, as I'm shuffling, just kind of consider and ponder what that question is and maybe like refine it a little bit. So the question I want to bring to today's reading is, what can I learn about this YouTube process that I'm embarking on that I can share with all of you guys? So I'm going to keep that in mind while I'm, shuffling these a little bit, cutting the deck. It's not super important that you have that intention set, but if you do have a question in mind, it can't hurt. Sometimes these are a little stiff. Alright, so the way that tarot works, if you haven't already heard of synchronicity, it's basically put very, very simply and in the context of tarot, that whatever card you choose will carry a specific meaning that is meant to be kind of considered for you. So I don't have to worry about sitting here and shuffling these 1,000 different times and making sure that it's all ordered, because I trust in the process of synchronicity, and I trust that whatever card emerges is the direction I'm going to go in. And for some of you out there, that may be a kind of a hard thing to swallow, but, don't use tarot then. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick the card. And remember that the question was, what can I do with this YouTube channel that I can share with all of you? Now you notice that I pulled the card up reversed. And you can kind of go two different directions with this. I think that for beginners, it's most useful to just consider the card without going in the reverse direction. The reverse is really useful if you're trying to get really specific with something and trying to kind of gain a little bit of a more fine-tuned insight when using tarot. Now, you'll notice that the card I pulled was the Moon, and because this isn't a suit card, it is a part of the Major Arcane, and that was what we talked about at the very beginning of the video. I believe it's 22 cards are part of the Major Arcane, and they're usually more like dominant and major, as the name implies. And first off in my readings, I like to just look at the card and to kind of consider how I feel about this card. Now, I really like the art style of this, but I think that there can be more drawn from here. And that sometimes in this process for me in YouTube, I think that I can kind of not really know where I'm going. I can kind of lose sight of what the vision is because, you know, sometimes I get stuck thinking that I have to have it all figured out and I have to have every single video planned and know exactly the trajectory of my YouTube channel. And I think that this card signals that, you know, it's dark outside and you can't know and see super far in front of you, but that there is still beauty in your reach, such as these white trees. Now, that may sound a little esoteric for you guys, so we can kind of open up this guidebook, which came with the deck of cards, and we can consider this at a little bit more of a deeper level. Because luckily, the person who created this deck has given us a little bit of insight on what she, you know, was trying to get across. So, we're looking for the moon. Just a little bit further. The moon has the attributes of vivid dreams and fears. The guidebook says, in many ways, the moon card encompasses the idea of the wild unknown. It is the shadow realm, the place where dreams, fears, and mysteries are born. Much darkness can linger here, and if you aren't careful, this can lead to periods of anxiety and self-doubt, almost as though you've lost your way in a house of mirrors. Many great artists have roamed this inner landscape. It's where imagination and creativity drift freely upon the midnight air. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I feel that my own personal description of what this card meant aligns pretty well with this. It talks about some of the fears I have and maybe some of the self-doubt and anxieties that I carry with me when pursuing this YouTube channel. But at the same time, I believe that this is where the creativity is born. I can't have it all figured out. And if it was all perfectly structured, there'd be no creativity to this channel and the videos I'm sharing with all of you guys. So that is a very brief tarot reading that hopefully shares with you a little bit more about what my process looks like. So I hope you enjoyed kind of watching the process I go through. And there's no really right or wrong way of doing this. I think it's really interesting to use tarot cards in a very introspective way because it causes you to consider a lot of things that you wouldn't naturally think about or consider. And sometimes it kind of forces you to consider some things that are very positive and also sometimes negative. And I hope that you can carry with you a sense of lightheartedness when it comes to using your tarot deck and to not take it super personally if you don't get wonderful cards all the time. Instead, use those opportunities as a way to, you know, introspect deeper on some maybe of your fears and some worries and anxieties. So, the whole goal of today's video was to share with you a little bit more about tarot and to demonstrate that it isn't all this kind of like fantasy realm of spirituality that a lot of people seem to think. So I hope that today's video is helpful for you in getting started with your tarot journey. If you aren't new to tarot and you are looking for a little bit more in depth, subscribe below. I'm going to be making more videos in the future going deeper into tarot and kind of looking a lot more at the intricacies and describing a lot more about the theory behind tarot. But today's video was just to kind of give us a first glimpse of what we can use this amazing introspection tool for. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, if you have any questions, comment down below. If you like this video, go and give a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this content, I would really appreciate a subscription. I'm trying to grow this channel and reach a lot more people because I feel that the content I'm creating is useful for others out there. I know myself and I would have really enjoyed coming across something like this. So I hope that you guys find all this content useful and encouraging sometimes. Anyways, as always, I will see you next time.